Hello, I'm Jesse Berger, founder and artistic director of Red Bull Theater. I'm zooming to you from our offices in Chelsea, Manhattan, the unceded ancestral home of the Lenape people. Welcome to the second installment of our multi-part, month-long exploration of Sor Juana's Love is the Greater Labyrinth as part of our Hispanic Golden Age Classics series, sponsored by a generous grant from the Spain USA Foundation. This series is part of Red Bull's commitment to expanding the classical repertoire, a mission we share with our partners on this project, UCLA's Diversifying the Classics initiative, led by Professor Barbara Fuchs. Our series includes a reading by Repertorio Español of Sor Juana's play in Spanish with English subtitles, and our own upcoming reading of the play on Monday, September 27th, newly translated to English by the UCLA's Diversifying the Classics group with Spanish subtitles. Information about how to watch all of these programs is available right on our website at redbulltheater.com. And now I'm very pleased to welcome Barbara Fuchs, one of the driving forces behind the project. Barbara will moderate tonight's conversation. Hi, Barbara.
Hi, Jesse. Thank you. I just want to say first what a pleasure it is to collaborate with Red Bull again and to bring in Repertorio this time. As some of you will know, we first collaborated last year in November at the La Escena Festival with a reading of Ana Caro's The Courage to Right a Woman's Wrongs. And so it's wonderful to be back. I'd like to begin by introducing my two co-panelists, valued collaborators on the collaborative project that is Diversifying the Classics. Marta Albalá Pelegrín is a professor in the Department of English and Modern Languages at Cal Poly Pomona, and Laura Muñoz, recent graduate of UCLA's Department of Spanish and Portuguese, is an ACLS Emerging Voices Fellow in the Department of Latin American and Iberian Cultures at USC. And so the three of us are going to give you a little bit of an introduction to the project at UCLA and some of the partnerships and initiatives that we've been involved in. And then we hope to really open it up to a conversation and take your questions, either about this particular initiative with Repertorio and Red Bull and Sor Juana's amazing play, or anything else that you might want to discuss. And I'll just take the opportunity to remind people that a week from today, we will also be having a conversation more specifically about the two productions of Sor Juana in English and Spanish. So that conversation will be more tailored to that text and those performances. So just a little bit about the initiative. This is a project that began around 2014, based on the basic insight, really, that in order to increase diversity in theater, it matters not only who performs, who directs, who is involved, but also what is performed. And this will give you, once again, a sense of why it's so perfect to really think about our collaboration with Red Bull, which also is an institution that pushes at the boundaries of what we get to see. And so basically what we try to do through Diversifying the Classics is think about acquainting audiences, acquainting practitioners and performers with the thousands of extant plays in the Hispanic classical tradition, few of which are translated and fewer even of which are regularly performed in the US. And so our feeling was that there are tremendously diverse audiences in the US that never get to have the experience of this canon, which in so many ways reflects the sort of deep historical traditions of playwriting in Spanish. So we work in sort of parallel modes. We have an adaptation initiative about which I think Laura will say a little bit more in a bit. We try to bring an awareness of this canon to different audiences at universities and schools in the area. Fundamentally, we are translators, and so we meet every other week in a translation workshop at UCLA, and we've now translated, I'm starting to lose count, which I think is a good thing, about 8 different plays, which we publish and also make freely available on our website for anyone to download and use. And we try to provide also the kinds of materials that might make it easier for practitioners who might not be familiar with this tradition to access it and take a chance on it. So dramaturgy packets, contextual introductions, pronunciation guides. Somehow this is always a bugbear for people. Why do we think that this tradition deserves to be better known? This is a body of plays really from the same time as Shakespeare, while England was seeing the flourishing of Shakespeare and his contemporaries on the Elizabethan and Jacobean stage. Spain and Latin America were producing remarkable talents, both male and female playwrights, such as Lope de Vega, Calderón de la Barca, Juan Ruiz de Alarcón, Sor Juana, Ana Caro. And so these names may not be as familiar to us now. The hundreds of entertaining, complex plays that they wrote have a lot to offer modern audiences. They are, I think, overwhelmingly complex, sophisticated texts that are very interested in the questions of what it means to present an identity in society, what it means to construct oneself for an audience. Really sort of pointed reflections on how constructed everything from class and gender are, and also how the rapidly changing social roles in Spain of the period might be managed. And all of these, we think, are issues that really resonate with us today. In addition to these, I think that the part that most often surprises viewers and theater makers is the remarkable agency of women in this corpus. So everything from playwrights writing plays for the commercial stage, as well as, closet dramas and so on, to directors of companies, actresses who are the divas of their time, and of course, as a consequence, characters, right? Sort of really meaty, juicy roles written for these actresses by the playwrights of the time, which I think actors today find surprising in Renaissance texts, and we want to make it a little less surprising to conceive of that kind of female agency. So I think I will pass things over now to Marta, who will tell you a little bit about the resources that we offer on our website, and we can circle back to any questions that you might have about what I've laid out.
If I may, just Marta, before you begin, Barbara, that's a great introduction, and I just wanted to say before I go into the background, I'll be listening in to this wonderful conversation, but I'm learning as well, and a lot of what you just said, I think our audience might be interested to know. You said to me over coffee 4 or 5 years ago when you approached Red Bull and me about collaborating with you in some way, and I'm embarrassed to admit I knew, of course, about the Spanish Golden Age plays and Tirso and Molina and Vega, and we had done some readings, but I certainly was not aware of all the untranslated works that you're working on, and that's really exciting to begin expanding the repertoire of the work that Red Bull can do and the work that other companies can do around the world, beyond just the dozen or so titles that, if you're aware of this repertoire at all in English, you probably know The Dog in the Manger or Life is a Dream, which are wonderful plays, but it's great to get to know some others. And that one's on such a wonderful parallel track with what, as you pointed out, with what Red Bull does, where we're looking at plays that are just the lesser produced plays of Shakespeare and his contemporaries. So it's great I'm so glad that this conversation began. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, and we were delayed a little bit by a certain pandemic, but we've managed to keep it going, and expanding the tent of it to include Repertorio Español this year is really terrific, and we're looking forward to a long and fruitful collaboration with you, and looking forward to a wonderful dialogue tonight. So with that, I'll get out of the way and just listen. And
thank you. It's a great reminder. I mean, I think, every generation reads with different eyes and is looking for different things in its repertoire. And certainly in our choice of what plays to translate, we have been very deliberate about looking out for plays that really showcase this kind of savviness, this sort of take on the world and the constructedness of gender and class in particular, things that we think will resonate with audiences today. And, in a corpus of 10,000 extant plays, there's plenty to choose from. So, yeah. Marta, over to you.
Okay, so I would like now to share our website, because it's one of the best resources you have for actually see what we are doing. we have a website that's built to have information about team members, and you will see them in a second. So if you're curious who is in the project, many collaborators have been in the project, are in the project, and have been through the year. We also have past collaborators. We have a place to go for contacting us, and you can find our information here. And the translations we were talking about. We have a new rebranded website that we are very happy about. And here what you have are several documents contextualizing the Comedia. I don't want to open it for you now, but you can do it at home. And here you have a pitch of how to introduce Comedia for Anglophone audiences, so people that know Shakespeare more than Lope de Vega or Ana Caro or SOR JUANA. And we have also suggestions for production. And this is another very interesting document. When you have a pitch for every play we have translated, you have substantive roles, the numbers of actors you will need for producing the play, the gender of the actors in the original play. And if we go to one of them, Force of Habit, you also will have who, we are a big group, who translated that particular play, our translation, again, the comedian context, and what we were talking about before, a pronunciation key. We have kept some of the names of the characters and also some of the names of the places, so that document is very useful for production. We have the introduction, that is in our Juan de la Cuesta edition, and you can just read it there with a lot of interesting information, and that's for every play, so you can go there and research a little bit about our work. Then we have a tab for performances and adaptations, where we have a kind of a database of what we have done. We have La Escena, what we did in the 2018 season and the 2020 season. And if you go, you can see the program. We have Golden Tongues, and I think Laura is going to talk about that later on. So I will stop here. These are adaptations that are inspired in Hispanic Golden Age plays. Then we have several events we have organized, such as Romeos and Julietas, the Comedia Slam that took place in 2019, and we have a database of past performances. A new exciting element that we have added this year, and we're going to premiere in November, is the Radio Comedia. These are classical Hispanic theater insert episodes about 1 hour long with interviews with the scholars and also some anecdotes. And these are going to be in Spanish. If you want to listen to a teaser or read more information, you have it at the bottom of the page. And finally, we have resources. Monologue for actors that you can buy by Juan de la Cuesta. Here's the introduction, that can help, especially as we were talking about before, female monologues are compelling for female actors. So I encourage you to have a look to the monologues. Then we have classics in the classroom, and I believe, Laura, you're going to talk about that later on. I will leave it here. These are curriculum design for elementary school in 12 sessions that we did with theatrical partners. And then we have a network of scholar partners. So if you're interested in a topic, you have here a resource for scholars that are specialized in Comedia and have different have done research in different topics, and you can consult who to be in contact with. And these are also people we regularly consult. And last but not least, our blog. And here in the blog, we have what we are doing, what other scholars are doing, and we try to keep it updated. So Now we have here our past performance with Repertorio and the performance that will be coming up next week with you in Red Bull. So with that, I want to pass the word to Laura so she can explain us more, and I will stop sharing.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. So my job today is sort of to talk a little bit more about the different initiatives that we have happening this year or in the near future. And as Marta mentioned, we have a few things kind of coming up. The first of which is the launch for our new podcast. We collaborated with a theater company in Spain called Jóvenes Clásicos, and they produced a audio version of Mujeres y Criados, which has been translated by Barbara as Women and Servants. This play is going to be in Spanish only, but it's also going to provide resources for people who want to bring it into the classroom. So we'll have an updated script with modern Spanish, modern spelling, in case you want to use that as sort of a guide if you're not a native Spanish speaker, or if you want to use it in the classroom as a way to guide students through. And then the really nice thing about the podcast is also that we have sort of done a series of interviews with different scholars in the field talking about the particular history of this play. As some of you might know, it was discovered in the archives and brought back to sort of the stage very recently, I think in 2014 or 2015, something like that. And so we get to interview the scholar who found it, as well as a few other scholars, and Marta and I are two of the hosts on that. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be happening sometime in November. And then after that, we're really excited. We got to work with a bunch of different playwrights. And so I'm going to talk about the Golden Tongues Initiative, which has been an initiative that kind of predates Diversifying the Classics. And this is an initiative where playwrights who are sort of based in Los Angeles get to do adaptations of Golden Age plays to the Los Angeles space. And that has taken the form of a really diverse set of plays in the past. So we've had like a Chinatown version of Golden Age plays. We've had versions where transgender characters are placed in the central roles. And so we're very excited about what's going to come of that collaboration this year. Our three playwrights for the year are Amanda Andre, who's going to be doing an adaptation of Lope de Vega's En Animal de Hungría, so The Beast of Hungary. Lena Patel, who's doing a version of The Widow of Valencia, which is one of the translations that we've done in the past of Lope de Vega's La Vida Valenciana. And June Carroll, who's going to be doing To Love Beyond Death, which is another one of our translations of Pedro Calderón de la Barca's Amar Después de la Muerte. So we're going to be very heavy on sort of the tragic side, which is new for us. We normally engage more with comedies, but The Widow of Valencia is definitely a comedy, so we'll have a nice balance there. We're also really looking forward to our next big festival, which is going to be taking place in the fall of 2022, and we're actually in the process of choosing which plays are going to form part of the festival. We're also kind of thinking on our feet about how much of it can be in person and how much of it can be online. What we found at the last festival was it was really nice to be able to engage people across the world, really, because of the opportunities provided by online stage productions, which is something that's been a really huge contributing factor to us continuing these collaborations with Red Bull, because, you know, they're in New York, we're in LA, but we're really creating connections across time and space with these initiatives. And the last thing I'll talk about really briefly is the Classics in the Classroom, where we're creating curriculum for K through 12 students. And that's something that I've sort of been involved with, and it's really fun to think about how we can do the same thing as has been done with Shakespeare, introducing younger audiences to these plays as something that is part of the rich heritage of the Spanish language, especially in a place like Los Angeles, where we have so many Spanish speakers. And so being able to provide bilingual resources or resources for students sort of at the entry level of theater, where they're learning about theater, but they're also learning about Spanish theater at the same time, has been really great. And our latest collaboration was with Dragoncillo Puppet Theater, which is based sort of in the Texas area. And if you haven't heard of the Dragoncillo Puppet Troupe, definitely look them up. They're wonderful. They do shows specifically geared toward younger audiences, and a lot of adaptations of plays sort of from this period, but also prose works like Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote. And sort of that's kind of what we have on our docket. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to talk more about any one of those initiatives.
Thank you, Laura. I just to circle back on a few things that you both mentioned, I think really the broader idea for the project is to think critically about, where are the obstacles to the Hispanic classical theater getting produced more often, getting introduced to audiences more often, and trying to solve all those problems, right? So when you think about, again, as Laura was saying, what it takes for audiences to think of Shakespeare as, everyone's, right? It takes a certain amount of exposure from the lowest grades up, right? And what would it look like to try to make comedia part of school curricula, particularly in parts of the country where there is a large population of Latinx students who might find this especially valuable, so that this becomes familiar from the school experience. Similarly, actors tend to carry with them things that they trained with, right? So the idea behind the bilingual book of monologues that Marta showed you was that we might offer actors some of that so that they might have those as their audition text, right? As the text they carried with them. And so we are very open to suggestions from people here today, from theater practitioners, to, where is it that we can help remove obstacles, right? So if pronunciation is an issue, we can tackle that. We're very happy to make our text available online and also to have people modify our text, right? We are not really interested in these being museum pieces. We're very interested in how they might speak to audiences and practitioners today. So if you want to cut, if you want to change an ending, we would love to hear about what you're doing, but we are very much in favor of the texts evolving in practice. We think that's a really key part of them. And that's also part of what lies behind the adaptation initiative, right? That sense that if these are classics and they are living texts, it's because they can continue to speak to writers and adapters as well as audiences. And I note that that's yet another thing that we share with Red Bull, which also has, its own new play festivals, many of which are adaptations of earlier texts. So, it's a whole ecosystem of trying to make these texts more familiar, to make them accessible to audiences and practitioners. And we're always looking for new opportunities. The podcast project, I think, sort of born of the pandemic and of watching all the interesting things that were happening in the sort of podcast space with making texts available while productions could not happen in the regular old way, has now become, I think, an exciting new opportunity, allowing us to work with actors in Spain to think about, those podcast texts being available for the classroom, etc. So I think I should have said this earlier, and I'm going to say it now. If you have questions, I think the easiest way for you to send them to us is to put them in the Q&A, and then we will watch that space and take your questions as they appear. And I don't know, Marta and Laura, if you wanted to add anything to what we said before, we can move into a more conversational part of the program.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is that we're always looking for suggestions of plays to be translated. And our very next play to be kind of on the docket for translation for this year is an adaptation of Don Quixote de la Mancha by Guillén de Castro. And so we're really excited about that one because it's really nice to bring a prose work that was adapted in the period to, a modern stage. But yeah, we're always happy to take suggestions.
So we perhaps while we wait for people to put their questions in the Q&A, we can just say a little bit about the SOR JUANA play. Again, we're going to be discussing both of the Zoom readings in more detail next week. But just to say, this is for us a really rich and rare example of getting to watch both plays, the English and the Spanish. Usually we're only able to watch our translation in performance when we are completing the translation. But it's been for me a super interesting exercise to sort of hear the language in the original as we are hearing what is the first performance of our own translation. And that process is super interesting in terms of thinking about, for us in our process of translation, making a text workable for practitioners is really key. And so we think of the first reading, such as the one that Red Bull is doing this time for the SOR JUANA, as part of the translation process, right? So we will typically have what we hope is a fairly polished, advanced draft with the introduction. I should say also that we translate every line of the play because we think that it's really for directors and for each performance instance really to figure out, a production text for that time and cut what needs to be cut in that instance. But we translate everything. And then we hand it over to the performers and we watch with slight trepidation to see, is this going to work? Is it going to roll off the tongue? Will the jokes be funny? Will people laugh? And there's this amazing moment of seeing the text actually sort of play out. But we take really careful notes. I have a script full of highlights and notes to myself from attending rehearsals for the Red Bull reading. And then we keep refining the translation before we fix it somewhat in time when we publish the books with Juan de la Cuesta. So I would say it's part of what's so exciting about the translation initiative is that it is very much in dialogue with performers, and we see that as an essential part of the work. When we're really lucky, we've had actors or directors in the room, and they remind us, that you can't put that many consonants in one line, or that actors need to breathe sometimes, or things like that. That you can't end a line with an ambiguous punctuation mark. We've learned a lot of lessons over the years, but even when we don't have the benefit of someone in the room with us, we lean very hard on those first readings of a translation to keep making it more and more accessible to performers. I think we have a question here from Patricia Vallera, who asks, have we translated La Celestina? And we have really focused, Patricia, on texts that are, that are more frankly sort of part of the dramatic tradition. And so we haven't really headed in the direction of Celestina, although it's had a really interesting recent production at Repertorio. And it's a text that I know Marta has written about and is quite the expert on. So I don't know, Marta, maybe you want to say something about Celestina.
We did not translate La Celestina, but we helped Repertorio creating materials for teachers about La Celestina. So there's a study guide for teachers on La Celestina that we created together. And also we created the subtitles for the performance of La Celestina. So we have not translated it, but we have helped performers to put it on stage and also help teachers and educators to understand the play.
So for those of you who may not be familiar with this text, this is a truly amazing text, not generally treated as dramatic, but an amazing story of in its original title, it's the tragic comedy of Callisto and Melibea, but the bawd Celestina steals the show to such an extent that really for hundreds of years now, the text has been known as La Celestina. And I would say that this is the original bawd figure. I mean, critics have written about how she's the figure behind Juliet's nurse and so many other characters. And it is an amazing sort of earth-shattering text and needs to be said. So. Let's see. So there's another question from Lynette here in the chat. How long did it take to translate each play? Were some more challenging than others? Maybe one of you wants to take that one.
Yeah, I can take that. I've been with the group since the beginning, so I can kind of give a sense of how long it takes. I would say we try to keep it within sort of the academic year. So and that, at UCLA, that means more or less October to June. But that's the bulk of the translation, but we always spend summer revising the play. And we now have several steps before it even gets to actors' hands that we kind of take on in order to get the play as polished as possible. So I would say probably about a year for each of the plays that we've done, although sometimes people from the group decide to translate on their own separately, and then we workshop in the group together. So that's the case with Barbara, who translated Mujeres y Criados, or Women and Servants, on her own, and I translated Guillen de Castro's Los Marquesados de Valencia, or Unhappily Married in Valencia, with a partner, Veronica Wilson. And so we kind of did that in our own time and workshopped that over the course of a few months. But I would say from start to finish, it's about a year. And yeah, definitely there have been really hard ones. I think to date, the hardest one that I can remember doing was Calderón de la Barca's Amar Después de la Muerte, which is To Love Beyond Death, partly because it's a tragedy and it exists at a more heightened language mode, but definitely also Sor Juana. She's a hard one. She's difficult because she really goes in for that Baroque language. I don't know if you guys have different opinions about which one was the hardest one.
Sor Juana, without any doubt, for me.
I mean, it may not be unrelated to the fact that we were translating Sor Juana on Zoom for the entire year, which, you know, doesn't help matters, but we sort of heroically persevered, and I'm infinitely grateful to all my collaborators for taking that on. But yeah, it's something like the length of a sentence or the length of a speech or the investment in a sort of heavily patterned language. These things vary among playwrights, and some of them are. I mean, you would notice in the Spanish immediately that, you know, it's a different register, it's a different syntax, and some are a little more complicated than others. But they all pose their own challenges. So. Susan Panda Garcia, hi Susan, says, how do you select a work to translate? Can you speak about the process of choosing among the thousands of possible plays? What are the factors and elements that you're looking for? Marta, do you want to tackle that one?
So we have talked about this network of partner scholars, and what we do is ask them also what plays do they think are untranslated and deserve a translation. Also, what Barbara mentioned before, we're choosing plays that are timely nowadays and have very strong female characters and courtly plays. So we think about that when we are gonna pick a play, and we try to ask as many scholars as we can and then choose. And so I think I replied to the factors and elements, and it will be very strong female characters. Sometimes we get a company that asks us to translate a play that happened with Calderón. So then we can translate something for someone that's going to put it on stage. That's also another mode of translation.
Yeah, this is a production that ended up not happening, as sometimes happens in the theater, but the idea was that there was going to be a sort of in Repertorio, a bilingual production of the Calderón. And so that's the only time we've translated a play that was previously translated. We also try to focus on things that have never been translated before, where really, you know, if you wanted to put them on in the English-speaking world and you didn't have the Spanish, you would have nowhere to go. And so we are really trying to focus on the plays that are still unknown to English-speaking audiences, because we feel that's where we can make the greatest difference. But as Marta says, we will be more than happy to consider requests if people have a production in view. I mean, I think there's all kinds of interesting combinations that people are starting to think about in terms of bilingual productions and productions where some of the text might be in Spanish, some of the text might be in English. And again, we're very, very open to the possibilities. We see ourselves as providing a full text in English, but we would love to see a production that played with both languages or included portions of text in both languages. And in answer to Jorge Garcia Granado's question, would you explore a soap opera format to adapt some plays? I mean, why not? We are more than open to adaptation. We just need someone to present the project, and we would be all for it, I think.
Yeah, we actually joked a little bit during the translation of this play, Love is the Greater Labyrinth, because there are moments of such sort of heightened melodrama that a few of us did imagine it sort of as a high school musical kind of thing. I think they lend themselves very strongly to sort of a really elevated emotional representation that, a soap opera might have. But like Barbara says, I think our strengths really lie in being translators and being sort of guides to the historical context of these plays. We definitely need collaborators who are more geared toward the adaptation side in order to have something like that come together. But that would be great. I would love to see a musical version of one of these plays as well. I'm all for it.
Yeah, and then, sorry, Marta, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was about to say that my dream is a musical of Calderon in the podcast. So that's my dream.
So spread the word. Marta's looking for collaborators. But we also are very happy to assist in projects that don't originate with us. So whether it is, publishing translations by other translators in our series, I think we have half a dozen now of Dakin Matthews translations that are being published in the Juan de la Cuesta series that we edit, and also in helping with dramaturgy. So whether it's a sort of straightforward production of Fuente Ovejuna that Laura has served as a dramaturg, or the project that you're working on now, Laura, if you want to talk about that, we are really happy to bring our expertise to projects that in any way engage Comedia, even if they're not projects that originated with us or that focus on the texts that we have translated. Because as we mentioned, those 10,000 texts, we're never going to be able to cover all of those. So.
Yeah, I want to go back to the musical comment. We did sort of help with a musical version of El Caballero de Olmedo, the Gentleman from Olmedo, for the last theater festival that we did. And that was, again, with Jóvenes Clásicos, the same people we collaborated on for the podcast. So they're wonderful. I don't know if that recording is available anywhere, but if it is, it's a great production. And I would have loved to have seen it in person as well as on screen. But I'm also working on right now dramaturgy for an adaptation of Lope de Vega's El Perro del Hortelano, or The Dog in the Manger, as has been translated in the past. And this is sort of a Gen Z version of that play called This Bitch Esta Sangre Quiero. And it's kind of taking the idea of high society and noble court life and translating that to the sphere of influencers and Instagram celebrity. And it works super, super well in that adaptation. So I'm very excited. It's also a bilingual adaptation. And my job is really just to lend my expertise as someone who knows the genre really well and help make that a really great production. That's coming up also in October, and we'll probably advertise it on the blog as soon as we have more details about when that's going to come out.
Yeah, that was going to be a Zoom production, right? So people can watch it from anywhere. Yeah.
Yes.
And then also, Laura, you, along with a couple of other members of the group, are also collaborating on a sort of early music project that involves translation. I don't know if you want to say a little bit about that.
Yeah, that one's fairly new. So we also had a request for some translation support that we're providing for an opera, actually, that's going to be done via I think it's the UCLA opera program, and we'll be helping translate the lyrics so that the actors and the singers sort of know what in the world they're singing. And that's going to be, I believe, based on a myth of Así sigue Galatea, I think is the title of that one. So that will be coming up. I think that performance is happening sometime in the spring. And so we'll also be advertising that on the website once we have more details about it.
Yeah, so we're really thinking in terms of concentric circles. We have the work that we do in the translation workshop, and with our festival, and that is kind of at the core of what we do. But we are more than happy to lend our expertise. I'm more than happy to volunteer various members of the team. I hope they don't hate me too much for that, for various projects, because really we do think that there is this sort of ecosystem of thinking about the Comedia, keeping the Comedia in mind, and the more spaces in which this is occurring, the more likely it is that we'll get some traction. And so please don't hesitate to contact us if there is any way in which we can help advance a particular project around Comedia, even if it is adaptation, even if it's in a different form than straight theater, because we would be more than happy to work with you. And similarly, if people are working on their own translations and they would like to workshop them, one of the silver linings of Zoom is it's relatively easy to bring someone into the room and have a conversation about challenges in a translation, or go over a passage or two, or give you our feedback on a translation. So we're very excited by those possibilities as well. So there's another question from Patricia Vallera, who asks, are you focusing exclusively on the Golden Age in Spain? Have you translated any plays from Latin America? So I don't know if either of you want to speak to that and the importance of sort of really thinking about the transatlantic connections here.
I mean, this last play is Sor Juana, and it was performed first in Mexico. And Sor Juana was a very famous female writer in Spain, but her plays and her life happened in Mexico. So I think we could consider that we translate Latin American theater as well. We have translated Alarcón also, that he has a slightly different life history than Sor Juana. He was born in Mexico and then moved to Spain and worked there at the court as a playwright. But his origins were in Latin America, we can say.
Yeah, so it's very interesting to think about this tradition as one that connects Spain and Latin America. And, you know, it's I think it's often really surprising to audiences when we point out that, you know, traditions of Latinx theater writing didn't start in the 1960s, right? That there's this very long history of writers writing in Spanish in the Americas, and that this is very much a phenomenon that tracks the Spanish Empire. So there are theaters in Lima, there are theaters in the Philippines, there are theaters in Mexico, and you know, the work that emerges is yes, European, but also with its local variants. And so, you know, there's really interesting work done on Sor Juana and some of the ways in which she engages with the difference of what it means to be a playwright in Mexico. And, you know, we feel that it's very important to acknowledge, right, the depth of that connection, right, that there has been theater connecting, that this tradition has really been connecting Spain and Latin America for 500 years now.
Yeah, and I would say that our expertise really lies sort of in the early modern Spanish period, but we're more than happy to have conversations and also open up dialogue or collaborations with creators who are more focused on more recent theater or even adapting for Latinx audiences today. And so one example of this is that we had a visitor once come and show us a play that he was working on that was I think one of the first plays written in California. And I can't remember the title of the play, but maybe Barbara, you remember. But we're definitely open for to the conversations, and we're all for supporting anyone who wants to engage in different periods of time. And that's also, I think, why it's so great to have the Golden Age initiatives. The Golden Tongues initiatives, because the playwrights themselves decide how they want to adapt Golden Age comedia into something that speaks to audiences today, and bridging that gap between sort of the empire of Spain and the effects of that empire in today's California or Los Angeles, I think is a great part of that initiative.
Yeah, so Patricia asks about Las Paredes Oyen, which I'm pretty sure is Alarcón. Patricia, you just need to pitch us. So, you know, send us a message and tell us why we should translate that one. But yeah, Laura, this is, this is a late 18th century play, which is the first play ever performed in California, was performed in the fort of Monterrey. Astucias para engañar un sobrino un tío, something like that is the title. And this scholar at the University of Oregon who came to speak to us was making the really interesting point that characterizing the Spanish presence in California as being all about the missions and sort of forgetting this Enlightenment tradition of lay theater and farces and comedies and plays that might be a little bit too racy for Mexico City and therefore might move to the sort of frontier space of the fort, was one way in which this kind of heritage of Spain in the US was oversimplified and an important part of that tradition forgotten. And so that recovering what lay theater might have meant in those spaces was an important way to really fully do justice to those traditions.
Oh, and I just put in the chat that actually Dakin Matthews has a translation of Las Paredes Oyen called The Walls Have Ears. And we have that, I think either it has been published or it's on the docket to be published as part of our series of Juan de la Cuesta. And Dakin Matthews is a phenomenal translator. He translates into verse, which we don't do. And so it's a lot of fun to see the different kinds of translations that can come when your focus is slightly different. We decided early on not to translate into verse because that was just going to be very difficult, I think, and he's very brave and has done a wonderful job with that in his translations.
That's why the title sounded familiar. So no, we will not be doing Las Paredes Oyen if Dakin has done that. But it's, when someone was asking a little while ago on sort of selection, this is another way in which the dialogue with practitioners is so rich because, it often is an actor or a director who have a particular love for a play and say, this, why has this never been translated when it is such an amazing play? And we would love to hear about other plays that any of you have encountered that you feel that way about, and we will get right to work. We might also say a little bit about some of the work that members of the group have done on entremeses, because that's not something that we have published yet, although it was an exciting initiative last year. Laura, did you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. So we had a request to translate some entremeses, and entremeses are short form theater from about the same time period, and usually they would be played in the middle of each act of the comedia. So for those of you who aren't familiar, comedia, when it was performed in the 17th century, was an all-day event, and you started with dances and singing and moved into act one, and then in between each act you would have jugglers or performers or entremeses, which are these interacts. And so there's just as many entremeses as maybe more as there are plays, full-length plays, and we started dabbling in that direction. We translated two. I think the first was El Maricón by Quevedo. I can't remember. And the other was the one that I translated with a member from our group, Rhonda Shara, and that was, I can't remember the title. Maybe Rhonda, if you can remind me.
La Casa Alguna?
Yes, La Casa Alguna, which we translated as, I believe, The Lounge, which is, they're funnier. They're sort of, these are, shorter form theater that is supposed to kind of undercut the very high, lofty stories about lords and ladies, and these are very much about people of the lower classes. And so La Casa Alguna is one that is about a young man, a young student who goes to a brothel and completely gets himself robbed from head to toe. And the other one, El Maricón, sort of imagines a world where, El Marión, that's what it's called, where women are courting men and sort of what that means for masculinity in the time period. And they were really, really fun. Rhonda's reminding me that we translated, our title tentatively is currently The House of Leisure or Pleasure or Risky Business. So that's what La Alguna is. And we had a lot of fun translating those, and we're actually considering doing more of those with the group, but they're really difficult because the humor is very, very hard. It's very hard to translate what would be funny in the time period to what would be funny today. And also the kinds of humor that are available in these entremeses doesn't always match what is available to us today. But the puns, we had a lot of fun and a lot of hair pulling trying to get those exactly right. We haven't had those performed yet, but we're really looking for an avenue to kind of have that come on stage and see whether or not it works. So if anyone is interested in shorter form theater, we're more than happy to provide those as well. I don't think they're on the website yet, but they will be soon, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how much harder it is for humor to attain the status of classic, right? I always remember being struck when we began the adaptation process by how willing the playwrights were to put in jokes that were sort of ripped from the headlines, you know. And as a Renaissance scholar, I was very concerned, like, don't you want this to have a shelf life? And they were completely unconcerned. They're just like, for the next production, we'll just write new jokes, you know. And it's a very different attitude to humor, I think, in the hands of contemporary writers. But also, I think, as translators of a text that depends primarily on humor, you have to be much more aware, right, of what will work today, and maybe that won't work in 10 years' time. But I think those are texts that are really open to translating and retranslating because they are so dependent on their humor. It's also the case, I think, that overall the importance of text for those really skits is much less important because they're incredibly physical. So they're another way, I think, in which to test the waters with Hispanic classical theater would be through these, because they're short, they're great for students, and a real opportunity for actors to ham it up because they're so visual, they're so physical. Speaking of the visual, I think another thing that we're hoping to do over the next few months, in conjunction with the podcast and other initiatives, is we are hoping to film a few scenes of the text we've translated and get those up on our website, because we've been told that it would be helpful for practitioners to get a sense of what these might look like on their feet. And so we have a grant and a project to film some scenes, particularly from Anacaro, I think is what we're going to do, and give a sense of those on the website, make those available on the website so that people can get a sense of what these texts might look like in performance. There's a question from Fernan Gomez Monedero. Thank you. You have an amazing project, he says. It seems like you already have an idea of how the play would be performed while you're translating it. Has it ever surprised you how a scene ended up being performed once you saw it on stage? Oh, that's a really lovely question. I mean, I can say a little bit, and then if you guys want to weigh in, but, you know, I think we're always surprised. It really is this two-dimensional to three-dimensional phenomenon. I think we see our job as translators as, you know, a kind of do no harm. Make sure that if you're fishing for a saying in the target language or a metaphor that you have to replace another metaphor with, that you're not depriving the actor of something that she needs to work with, right? A reference to the body, that we're not somehow omitting a pattern of meaning, you know, across the play. Say, you know, if there's a joke about an elbow in the first act, we don't want to take out the elbow in the second act, right? But that's just kind of our what we feel is our responsibility in our practice as translators, and then really to watch these things happen kind of in the bodies and voices of the actors, with the smarts of a director and all those eyes on the text, is really amazing. I'm thinking just now of when we were at the Stratford Festival a couple years ago, and we did some workshops with actors, and, you know, they were fairly quick, but it was just, in particular, we were working on the play called The Force of Habit, La Fuerza de la Costumbre, which is about very much about like siblings who are raised in the wrong gender, the opposite gender, and what it might mean to force them back into their gender, their sex of birth. And so the scenes where the actor playing Hipólita, the sister in the pair who has to be brought from her sort of masculine self-presentation to a feminine self-presentation, is being taught how to sit and cross her legs, and how she can't just let her body be, but has to regulate it in all these ways. It was just incredible what the actor could do with, you know, just the way in which she played with her limbs, right, on a pillow on the floor. And I just have a very vivid memory of how, you know, a play that was so focused on what the body means, right, and how the body is presented in these contexts, obviously took on such a much richer dimension on stage. So for me, yeah, it's always a marvel and a delight to see what actors and a director will do with it.
For me, it was La Viuda Valenciana, The Widow of Valencia. We have this scene with three characters that was a chorus scene. Each of them was saying a different thing, and it was very difficult, or at least to see what was going on when we were translating, and also to translate. And I remember wondering how this is going to work on stage. I don't see the jokes. And it was the funniest scene ever. It was fantastic. They were singing, everything makes sense when it was performed, and three characters were actually doing the magic. And in the text, for me, it looked like something that was really challenging.
Yeah, we make certain assumptions, right, about what actors can handle, what audiences can handle, and they're not always correct, you know. Like we translated a very lively, funny play by Lope called La Noche Toledana as A Wild Night in Toledo, and it has this, you know, sort of set piece, which is a long description of the gardens in the Palace of Aranjuez, and you know, this very foppish character is essentially showing off by talking about the flowers he's seen and the birds, and it was murder to translate. And we kept thinking, okay, we're putting all this work into this, and the first thing any director is going to do is cut it. And that one got a staged reading at UCLA under the direction of the inestimable Michael Hackett, who's been our really wonderful collaborator over many years. And he's very, because he understands this stage and the process where we're still refining the translation, he typically doesn't really cut for those readings. And so he left the speech, and the actor who played this role just went to town, and like the sheer relish, right, of having this very sort of show-offy, really showstopper of a piece to play with, carried the day in a way that, as Marta was saying, we might never have imagined from reading it and struggling with it and sort of worrying over time about, you know, will this work? And I mean, sometimes you've got to trust Lope, you know, like they really, like they knew what they were doing. And there's a, sometimes it's a monologue that has its own resources, right, to be much livelier than we might expect. Sometimes it's this choral quality where the voices together are doing things that are harder to recognize on the page. I think since we've added table readings to our process, which we just do with our limited acting abilities, that has helped as an intermediate stage. But there still is, I think, a wonderful moment of discovery when we finally hand it over to the professionals. So
I think a great kind of way to bring it back to our current, you know, series is that the Sor Juana play, I think on paper, it starts off very differently than where it ends up. And so we struggled a lot getting into that translation because it starts in this very high mode. There's a chorus, there's like singing, and then it transitions very quickly into sort of humor with probably one of the funniest named gracioso characters or you know, comic servants, atún or tuna in the translation. And that transition was hard to imagine. And also you have King Minos, who's sort of speaking in a very different mode than the rest of the characters, but seeing it done by Repertorio, that's a really funny, if anyone has had a chance to see it, it's a really funny way to approach it, because that actor, you know, in his little Zoom square is the only one that's in a full costume on a full stage. And that's exactly how that needed to be played, because he is sort of existing in his own mode as the king, while everyone else sort of has their own thing going on in a very different register. And so that's a really fun, I think, way that we can try to imagine as much as we can, but we also don't have the skills of a director to kind of think about this in 3 dimensions, like Barbara said. So we always learn something from seeing them performed. And it's just as much fun for us, I think, as it is for audience encountering it for the first time.
yeah, and I'll just share one more story in terms of the how this kind of respect for what actors and directors will do leads us to the decision not to cut anything out as we translate, right? Because as you'll see, when Melia Bensusan puts together her performance script for Red Bull, there are some cuts, and some have to do with the feasibility of, singing on Zoom or musicians for what is really a reading on Zoom and so on. And part of me is thinking, oh, of course, maybe we should just get rid of that. Wouldn't that be easier? And then, I got an email from someone who was interested in having his class of theater students watch the play and read the play. And that person's own background was as an opera director. And I immediately thought to myself, those opening lines will speak to that practitioner in a completely different way, because that's where he might make something of it. And so it really seems to me that we're not, we don't believe in fidelity in translation or anything like that, but we do believe in leaving the choice about what to cut to practitioners, so that we can put forth the fullest, richest version of the text, and then let people go to town in terms of what they want to cut and what they think will work best in performance. So that's sort of our commitment there. I think we are just about at the end of our time, so I just want to make sure that there are no burning questions in the audience whom I can't see that you might want to put in the chat. And otherwise, I think all that is left is really to thank Marta and Laura for being here with me today, to thank Jesse and Nathan again for setting up this incredible event, and to remind you all to tune in on Monday for the Red Bull reading, which will be up for a few days. The Repertorio reading is available, I believe, until October 27th. And so Monday night, 7:30 New York time, 4:30 California, is the streaming of the Red Bull reading. And a week from today, we will have a conversation more specifically about SOR JUANA's play. So sorry, let me just, another lovely thank you. Thank you for all the lovely words of support in the chat.